Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and on behalf of Dr. Charles Small, the visionary founder and CEO of ISGAP, and myself, welcome back to the ISGAP Hour. Charles, we have a great guest, and it's going to take up most of the hour, but I want to ask you quickly, because I'm so focused on ISGAP outcomes, the results of work, the tangible results. Another victory.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the kindergarten through 12th grade program for a minute and what happened.
Right. So for the past couple of years now, we've been researching a program called Choices, which is based at Brown University. Actually was based at Brown University. And through our research, we discovered that the Choices program was funded by the Qatari regime, and they were creating curriculum for 8,000 schools across the country, rewriting the history.
So that probably means a couple of million kids?
Correct. And these are kids, K through 12, children. And they were changing the curriculum, erasing Jewish presence and Christian presence out of the Middle East, demonizing Israel.
With the imprimatur of Brown University.
Correct, with an Ivy League university, also associated with Duke University in North Carolina. And we uncovered a lot of money going to this program and really rewriting the history and the curriculum into an anti-Semitic, anti-American.
You issued the report, you blew the whistle.
Correct.
And Brown University?
So our report came out around the same time that the federal government froze $500 million at Brown University over Title VI, discrimination against Jewish people at Brown. Our report came out the same week, and within 24 hours, Brown said they're closing down their program, the Choices program, and any affiliation to Brown.
Bravo.
So
bravo to ISGAP, and bravo to you, Charles,
thanks.
for leading the effort.
It's a whole team effort, and your voice is
It's got to be
this.
all about outcomes, and ISGAP is producing one outcome after another.
We need many more. We're on the way. Yeah.
Charles, if you're ready, shall we invite our guest in?
Wonderful. I'm ready.
Great. JBS viewers, I'd like to introduce you to our very special guest on the ISGAP Hour this week. I think many of you will recognize the name very quickly, and perhaps the face and the voice as well. And that's Shai Davidai. Shai Davidai, for the last 6 years, has been on the faculty at Columbia University. Earlier, he had received his PhD from Cornell University, did a postdoc at Princeton University, taught for a couple of years at the New School, and then came to Columbia University.
That's true.
You'll know by the name, and you'll hear that he's an Israeli. And since October the 7th, many of us have come to know him, if not in person, then we've certainly heard his voice on social media, in countless videos, news broadcasts. He has become one of the faces at Columbia University especially, standing up for the Jewish people, standing up for Israel, often with extraordinary courage, sometimes alone, but often in the company of others who share his views. Shai, welcome to the ISGAP Hour.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. And I should say, I've been trying as much as possible when I refer to myself to refer myself as an Israeli Jew, because I find that a lot of times American Jews or Canadian Jews or French Jews, they see Israeli as a different category, and I try to remind people, you're American Jew, I'm Israeli Jew. We live different places, we may be a bit different, but the Jew is the same. And it also helps me, connect with my non-Jewish compatriots in Israel, right? So you got, an Israeli Arab, an Israeli Muslim, Israeli, right? So for me, it's really important that we do that. Yeah.
So lots of topics we want to touch on, but since you raised this issue, you're wearing a Star of David very prominently.
Oh.
May I ask, were you wearing it on October the 6th?
I was not. A lot of people have asked me
tell us a story about that decision and why you choose to wear it so prominently.
Yeah, I will tell you that it started for the wrong reasons, I might say, and it evolved and developed for the right reasons. So, it started as a davka, like a bit of a spite. What happened was I was meeting with someone who used to work with me, was a PhD student, when he informed me that he will no longer be working with me. And I understood that there's something more than just, I'm busy. So I started digging deep, is it really that you're just busy or reprioritizing your work, or there's something else? And, after a while he said, I have a problem that you, as a white man, are, speaking up, about things that I was speaking up on campus. And I told him, I disagree with your comments, but more than that, I disagree with the fact that I'm not white. I'm Jewish. I pass as white. I enjoy a lot of the privileges that white people experience in the United States, but I'm Jewish. And in a way, he refused to accept it. So I went home and I decided that I'm going to show the world that I'm Jewish. Because unlike religious Jews, Hasidic Jews, my Jewishness was something that was not visible. It was I've never hidden it, but it wasn't, I wasn't walking around the streets screaming I'm Jewish. So I went online, bought the biggest Magen David that I could find. And then the day I got it, the very next day I came on campus. I deliberately wore like a shirt, a button-down shirt that was a little bit open so everyone could see it. And I was walking around almost like a peacock to get in people's faces and show them, like, don't erase my identity. I was doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Because what then I realized was that I wasn't really wearing it for them, the people that refused to see me for who I am. I was really wearing it for other Jews. All of a sudden, other people that don't know who I am, didn't recognize me on the street, they saw that I was wearing a Magen David and they felt more comfortable. Like in airports, they started asking me questions about news from Israel. And finally, it became a thing that I wear for myself. I wake up every morning, I put on my Star of David, and it reminds me that we're still in this fight. Not the war in Israel, so much as the fight here in the diaspora. And interestingly, today, for some reason, my son wanted to wear a Star of David for school. He goes to a public school, and I said, you know what, yeah, why not? He's 9 years old, and it's Yom HaZikaron when we're taping this, Memorial Day in Israel. I said, yeah, if there's any day to wear it, now is the day. So I vowed not to take it off until every Jew, regardless of whether they can hide or not hide, their identity is safe.
So thanks for that. Can we stick again with October 6th?
Yeah.
And ask not about you, but about the campus on which you were teaching, Columbia University. We'll come to Columbia University after October 7th in a moment. Did you see signs looking back, now retrospectively, that what exploded at Columbia, which made Columbia in a way emblematic of the entire American higher education system? Were the signs there? Did we all miss them? Were they not there? What happened?
So I think that's an important question, a great question. So first of all, not everyone missed them. I definitely missed them. ISGAP didn't miss them, and looking back and reading all the reports that ISGAP published, reading books by Deborah Lipstadt, by Barry Weiss, the signs were there. But for me, someone living on campus who treated my job as a professor as a job, like any other job. You show up at 9 o'clock. I would show up before everyone, 5:30, leave, go be with my kids. I wasn't involved in this kind of everything that was happening. I mean, looking back, now I know that even April of 2018, Students for Justice in Palestine were protesting Yom HaShoah Day, the Memorial Day for the Holocaust. So things were there. The thing that I did notice was the indifference. That was something that I already noticed happening, and specifically...
On the part of whom?
On the part of the faculty and the administration. And when I say the indifference, it's the silent majority who is willing to speak up for any minority other than the Jews. And I noticed it very specifically after there was a Saturday Night Live with Dave Chappelle, where it was 2021 or 22, if I'm not mistaken, and he spoke about the quote-unquote the Jews, how you can say the word the, and you can say the word Jews, but you can't say the word the Jews. And then his entire thing was about, really, it was an modern anti-Semitic screed. And it was a Saturday Night Live on Monday. When I got to work, I noticed that none of my colleagues who were very active on social media have said anything. So I just said, it was the first time that I've written something political or somewhat opinionated on social media. I said, Where are you all? Where is everyone who righteously spoke about, hatred against black people or any person of color, against immigrants, against trans, against lesbian and gay? Why are you not speaking up about this? And the crickets were just, it was incredible. I mean, then I realized something is off here. The same thing happened at the New School, where we really, after I was at the New School when the Tree of Life shooting happened, nothing stopped. There wasn't let's take a day to just talk about the problem. It wasn't an issue for my colleagues, except obviously for my Jewish and Israeli colleagues. So I knew the indifference was somewhat there, but when everything exploded on campus, I was shocked because I didn't know how much hatred there was.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about Columbia University post-October 7th. In a way, let me ask you a big question looking ahead. Is Columbia University redeemable? We can get into the details.
Yeah.
Administrations, presidents, task forces, but
I think it's an important question, and the truth is I don't know, but I must carry myself in the world as if I believe that it is, because if not, then what are we doing? I must have some hope that Columbia and all these other morally corrupt institutions, if it's educational, if it's media, if it's in politics, they must be redeemable, because if not, then we might as well pack up and leave, and I don't want that to happen.
So what's the pathway from here to redeemability in the judgment of Shai Davidai?
So before we get to the concrete actions, which I think everyone is entitled to an opinion and we can argue about it, I think the pathway needs to start with what is the direction and what is the beacon or the light that we need to be following. And for me, it's going back to the basics of what universities are about. And that's the exploration and education of truth. That's what a university is supposed to be about. Everything else is secondary. Universities must be about how do we unveil the truth. If it's in the social sciences, the exact sciences, and the humanities, how do we get closer to the truth, and how do we educate the truth to the next generation, pass it on? Somewhere, and I don't know the exact year, but somewhere in the past few decades, the universities in North America have taken an additional goal, which is social activism, social justice, political activism. Each university calls it differently. But like Jonathan Haidt says, you can't have a circle with two centers. Once you have truth, but also something else, then there are decisions happening at the university level that are not motivated by truth, but by their social agenda. That is a problem. I'm not saying institutions shouldn't have social agendas, but not an institution of higher education.
Okay, but there are those who would argue that they're not two centers in a circle, they are the same center, that my truth is the truth.
Well, ironically, it's the same people that would argue that we live in a moral relativistic world when there are no truths, because every truth is equally valuable and important. And that is why we should be listening to lies as well as truths, because it's someone else's truth. And I always say, I don't have the truth. I don't know if you have the truth. I don't have the truth.
Of course we do.
But,
Just follow ISGAP.
But I do believe that the truth exists, and that we should be striving towards the truth through message of, through the path of enlightenment, which is, empirical research, logic, rationality. It's not that I dismiss anyone's emotions, subjective views, but I don't believe that that's how we should be navigating our path towards the truth.
So here's a question. I'm not sure if you've been asked this before. I hope not. Suddenly you get a phone call from the Board of Trustees of Columbia University, and they say, you've been an outside critic. We're going to make you president of the university for a day, a week, a month. Fix it. Now Shai Davidai is no longer the outside critic who
Right.
can easily say things. What does President Shai Davidai of Columbia University do as his priority issues in this space?
So it's funny that you say that, because from the very first moment, I didn't want to be an external critic. On November 6, 2023, I met with the senior vice president of the university on a one-on-one meeting. It was for 3 hours, where I told him, I want to work with you. I want to work either behind the scenes if you don't want to be associated with me, or in front of the stage, anywhere. And I told him, like, the problem that you're facing is X, the open support for Hamas on campus, lawlessness. Here's a 3-step plan. I actually gave him a plan. And I
Okay.
said, the plan isn't perfect. And the plan was as
Okay,
follows.
but now you've been catapulted to the presidency. You don't have to work for that person.
Right. So,
Okay.
and that's been going for a while. Every president, we are now in our 3rd president, year and a half. Every president, I sent an email with my phone number saying, I would love to work with you. So it's not for lack of trying that I'm an external critic.
And they have not called you back.
They have not even replied to my emails.
Yeah.
So again, are we talking about the lowercase p problem or the uppercase? Because the lowercase is the issues with
uppercase.
Israel, but the uppercase.
Or, I'll put it differently. How do you put the Columbia University train back on the tracks in the direction that you spoke about?
Right. So I think first and foremost, we have to create systems of accountability at the university. We have a lot of policies for students, but we have no enforcement, no accountability. Part of the negotiations with the universities now with the federal government is to put in practice the rules that already exist. But I think more important is creating systems of accountability for professors. And what I would do, first and foremost, is take the systems that already exist of the way that the university has held accountable professors for saying even the tiniest racist, sexist, homophobic remark, and apply them to if you're saying anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli, or anti-any nationality. I think that's the first and foremost thing. Someone like Joseph Massad, professor who said that he experienced jubilation and awe of the October 7th massacre, shouldn't be teaching, shouldn't be advising students, shouldn't be on dissertation committees. Just like the chair of the psychiatry department at Columbia 2021 was pushed away from all of these things for making some racist remark on their own social media page. Right? So we have the mechanisms in place, and I would say enforce them across the board. But I think there's something more important that really it's above Columbia's president's pay grade, but they could start, which is the tenure system. The tenure system, which started as probably a good idea, isn't working to serve the purpose of the university. So I wouldn't, maybe not completely remove the tenure system, but I would create obstacles, I would change the way it's done so that when you have professors, for example, teaching inside a Hamas, pro-Hamas encampment on campus and excluding students based on their religious or national origin, those professors won't teach another day in the university. Now, of course, that is why I would never become a president of the university, right? But I would tell you one thing, if I became the president of the university, the last thing on my mind would be, how do I stay the president of the university? And I think what we have seen at Columbia and other universities is when you pay people, more than $1 million to be a president of the university, their goal becomes, how do I keep my salary? How do I not rock the boat? And I think if anyone's been, following what I've been doing in the past year and a half, that's the complete opposite of what I believe in.
So again, I know we've been talking about this, but to crystallize it, how could such a great university, and Columbia University is a great university, one of the great universities in the world in terms of reputation, prestige, research, breakthroughs, how could it have gone so wrong? I mean, how could so many systems have broken down, not all at once, but over a period of time? And the overseers include, but are not limited to, the president of the day. you have a board of trustees, you have a donor community, you have others who presumably are keeping an eye on their cherished institution. How could it have gone so wrong? How could Columbia University, in the heart of the largest Jewish population in America, if not the world, have allowed itself to become captive to all of this?
I think it's a really tough question to answer because I don't believe Columbia has ever gotten it right. And if it has, it was for a very short period of time, right? So Columbia not only had the quota system for Jews in the beginning of the 20th century, they invented things like geographical diversity. So they won't take as many students from New York City and Brooklyn were heavily Jewish, and they could start recruiting students from Connecticut, Nebraska, where there weren't many Jews. They invented the idea of applications on holistic, looking at the applicant as a whole rather than their grade and their merit, because again, you could then remove certain Jews. Then in the 1930s, after they already removed a lot of the quotas or opened themselves up more, 1934, Columbia University had a very prominent keynote speech by the Nazi Germany to the United States. And when the Jewish professors and students protested, the professor was immediately fired and the students were actually arrested. So that's the 1930s. Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran.
That one I remember well.
2008.
Lee Bollinger was president at the time.
Lee Bollinger was, the only place that Ahmadinejad spoke in the United States, other than the UN, was Columbia University.
And by the way, JBS viewers, for those of you who don't know, he was then the president of Iran, and outspoken in his hatred of Israel and of Jews, and an invited guest.
And one of the, one of the main engines of the Iranian nuclear bomb, right? So Columbia has
to wipe Israel off the map.
Wipe Israel off the map, right? So Columbia has never really gotten it right when it comes to Jews. Again, not because they didn't know, because there's always been protests, but because they either took Jews for granted or they didn't care. But, the current climate that we have right now is due to two things that are happening at once in universities, which is, and two important things, by the way, democratic decision-making and self-governance. What that means, basically, is that if we are the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at Columbia University, we decide for ourselves, the university can't touch us, and we decide by majority vote. Meaning that if you have 55%, you don't need 90%, but 55% of faculty who agree on a certain issue, and it doesn't matter if that issue is Israel needs to be exterminated, the US is the worst place in the world, and all the other things that you're hearing on campus, 55%, then the next faculty to be hired would be in the majority agreement. The PhD students that will be admitted will be in the majority opinion. The undergrads, the courses that are being approved by the department, then you get to 65-35, 75-25, and you get to a point where Columbia, of registered voters, about 90% vote for one party, and the rest are split between independents and voting for the other party. And it doesn't matter, by the way, which party is which. It just shows you the university becomes not a university of the people, but university of the party, of university of the ideology. And that's when you get things wrong. And the same happens in other universities where the 90-10 is broken at the opposite, at the inverse. Right. Because that's not the truth.
Charles.
Yeah, so you're touching on a lot of important issues. So one of the things you said earlier, that somebody didn't want to work with you because you were white and privileged, which was a euphemism for being Jewish and privileged.
Well, because I was a Jew that was speaking up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we also, I think for the viewers, we have to remember that you were speaking about discrimination in Columbia historically against Jewish people. But we have to remember that all of the professors of theology, of eugenics, of biology, argue that Jews were not white, and that we were, poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race. So this anti-Semitic racism, rooted in the best universities of Europe, led to the Shoah, led to the Holocaust. Less than 2 generations later, less than 80 years later, the intellectuals, I call them intellectual clowns, are now arguing that the Jewish people are white and privileged and apartheid colonial settlers. So, in less than 2 generations, our race has changed, led by the great intellectuals. Edward Said said in 1983, a professor at Columbia University, a very famous, impactful professor, argued that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, that he was the inheritor to the Frankfurt School of Thought, and that the professors in America, the Jewish professors in America became, in his words, fat scribes in the suburbs. He was the last Jewish intellectual. The Palestinians were Jews. The Israelis were the Nazis. When he said this in 1983, people thought he had a bad day. But this is now the discourse. So ideas really matter.
But I do think he had a bad day, because typically he would not say that out loud. And if he did, he would say it behind closed doors. The bad day was not the ideas, but the fact that he allowed himself to actually say what he believed. Yeah. And that was, for him, the problem.
And then still be quoted 42 years later.
Right, and now the Edward Said professor, who just recently retired, Rashid Khalili, was also feted as the inspiration behind the encampments and SJP at his retirement party. So clearly these 2 intellectuals, Joseph Massad and their fellow travelers, have really had an impact in the battle of ideas, from the classroom to the encampment and now on our streets. So how do you see the responsibility? Because these things don't happen in a vacuum. Many people, many of the viewers think that intellectuals are sort of disconnected, we're in the clouds and we're disconnected from reality. But I think the battle of ideas really has strong implications in our society. This is where young people learn to be citizens. So how do you see this discourse really shaping the lives and of Americans, of American citizens? Not just
wow,
the elite.
There's a lot to
towers.
unpack here, and I think it's not. I think you're right that in one thing, the universities should be the place where, teenagers become citizens, but they are not. They're a place where teenagers become pampered teenagers or adult teenagers, and I think that's a difference. But I'd say before we get to the place of what is the role of the university, I think one of the problems is, again, going back to the truth, is people are unaware of the history. So for example, like everyone who lauded Said, and Said was a great intellectual, even if his heart, I believe, his moral compass was corrupt, they don't know that Said's book, Orientalism, was given by the ancestors to Hezbollah, the proto-Hezbollah. They took hostages in Lebanon in the 80s, including an American pastor, not a Jew, a pastor, that stood, I think it was 2 years in captivity. And he was given English books. And one of the books was Edward Said. So, terrorists, Islamist terrorists, giving an American pastor who's held hostage, a book by a professor at Columbia. And that didn't raise any red flags, because no one is learning about that. Yeah. Or they don't know that the idea, the libel of Zionism is racism, that it actually starts in 1930s, the Third International Communist Conference. Then after the Six-Day War, it takes on really speed, with Yasser Arafat being propped up as the leader by the Soviet Union. Anti-Zionist screeds, 1968 in Poland. They push out 15,000 of the remaining 30,000, down from 3.5 million, because they are quote-unquote Zionists, but they push out the Jews. And then that makes it to campuses, and now everyone is anti-Zionist without knowing their history. So the big problem, again, is universities have failed their mission of educating. Now, if you learn all the history, you learn about the anti-Semitic roots of anti-Zionism, you learn about the terrorist links of Edward Said and Rashid Khalili and all that, and you still decide to be an openly blatant anti-Semite, well, I will still fight you and disagree with you, but I would at least respect your intellect for doing that. That's not what's happening now. Universities are creating really uneducated but overconfident individuals. What they should be doing is the exact opposite, right? And that's why I think we should be creating highly educated but humble and not as confident individuals. And for that, we need to show students and faculty differing opinions. Again, not just about Israel, not just about Jews. You know, right now, I, for example, believe most of the evidence shows that we are experiencing human-made climate change. Now, you may disagree with me, and we can open the facts and we can argue about that. But you can't do that on the university campus. Because in university, my belief, which happens to be backed by most of the evidence, is the only belief to be noted. And no one is going to come on campus and say the opposite. Now, some people say, why should we say why should we allow the opposite space on campus? Isn't it wrong? And I would say because it's making us lazy. Because if you don't have to argue with the other side, you don't need to check your own sources, you don't need to make your argument foolproof. And that's what's been happening with most of the most important topics in the United States. Climate change, gun rights or gun laws, immigration, foreign policy, gender identity, all of those things. Many of them, by the way, ideologically or value-based, I am with many of my faculty, but I want someone from the other side at the university. I want them to come and show the students that I am maybe in the majority opinion, but I'm not in the only opinion. We don't have that. In fact, people say that the most important thing of universities is fostering critical thinking, which I think is an incredibly important thing. But we have created this model where critical thinking is taught at the class. Someone will come and tell you about the Socratic method. But we forget that one person alone cannot teach critical thinking. It goes against the idea of critical thinking, because then you're accepting that person's view as dogma and you're not criticizing the person who's teaching you critical thinking. Critical thinking can only be taught by two or more individuals, where you go to one class, you hear one thing, you go to another class, you hear another thing, and then you sit in your dorm room or you sit over a beer with your peers and you try to make sense, where do you stand on that spectrum? And that's you engaging critical thinking. Unfortunately, other than on maybe like the most trivial issues on campus, we don't have that at Columbia, we don't have that at Harvard, at Yale. We don't have it in most of these expensive universities.
If I may, to shift gears a little bit, I know the community, the JBS viewers, really, I think, admire your bravery in standing up and really being a spokesperson for truth and defending against hatred, against Jews, against Israel, but also for the principles that you speak of what an educational institution ought to be about. And you were, brave and articulate. I'm honored to meet you for the first time, and
Same here,
appreciate what you've been doing. But I have a bit of a question, and I've been discussing this with some colleagues. You're one of the few Jewish voices that are out there. I'd say a Jewish leader kind of fighting against anti-Semitism post-October 7th. There are a lot of allies of the Jewish community in Israel who are not Jewish, who are selling books, who are on the mainstream media, who are speaking out against anti-Semitism, which is important. But my colleagues and I have been discussing recently, what are the implications where these voices fighting anti-Semitism are predominantly not Jewish, and they're having debates from various perspectives, discussing the Jews and discussing Israel without always having a strong Jewish voice there. What do you think of this discourse that's emerging?
Yeah. Look, I was as surprised as you. When I started speaking up, I didn't see it as a brave thing, because I thought, oh, I'll do this, and then tomorrow another Israeli or Jewish professor will do it, and then another one. And it's not brave, because we're just going to all be speaking up. I didn't realize I'll be the only person, right? Among professors, because students are speaking up.
Yeah.
The implications are clear. I told this to a group of people. I was at an event where people were bemoaning the fact that we are by ourselves. And I told them, imagine a non-Jewish person who believes in everything that we believe in, who wants to speak up, but they see all their Jewish friends hiding.
Yeah.
Why would an ally come and stand for something when they don't see us standing for it by ourselves, right? We lack that pride. I say like in a very general term, we lack that pride that once we will shine that pride and show like we are standing up for ourselves, many of our allies would be attracted to that because they would see, oh, okay, this is moving, something's happening. Unfortunately, and by the way, I think the other issue is that I don't believe in us outsourcing our fight. I love and support any person who stands with us in the fight, despite sometimes I disagree on their reasons for standing up, for their intention, but they're doing the right thing and I applaud them and I will stand with them in their fights if the fight is right. But it's my job, it's not their job. It's my job to lead the fight for the Jewish people and it's their job to join. And when they have a fight, it's their job to lead the fight and it's my job to join. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that yet. But in my podcast, which I started doing, called Here I Am with Shai Davidai, which is just amplifying other people's voices, this recent season that just started coming out, I started interviewing non-Jewish voices. People that I think should be amplified more for showing, not just non-Jews, but showing Jews, look, if they are doing this, if they have the courage, what's your excuse?
Do you see a difference with the students, with the younger generation? Are they a bit stronger than, say, your generation?
The Jewish younger generation is way stronger. Yeah. Now, it could be that, this is just an age thing, but 20 years ago. But I can tell you this. When I was 20, 21, 22, there's no way that I would be standing up and fighting for Israel, for the Jews, or for what I believe in, because I didn't have the intellectual capabilities like these Jewish students. I didn't have the courage like these Jewish students. And by the way, I was very self-involved. And I think I'm just in awe of the many young Jewish students. Unfortunately, they don't have many role models. And that is the problem, because you can't just have a fight without a role model.
You served as a role model to a lot of them, which is important.
I hope so. Yeah. But I don't think that my way is the only way or the right way. And I think there are many ways to fight, and I wish they had more role models for, I would say, my age, like let's say I'm 41, so let's say from 35 to 55. That's the silent Jews, right? I want them, or 30 to 60. I want them more and more to speak up, because their kids, their grandkids will see that and will say, you know what, I'm doing that too.
Some of the criticism of Shai Davidai that I've heard from within, let's say, our community is he's too loud, he's too aggressive, he's too media hungry. Mm-hmm. Why couldn't he just tone it down and pull it back a little bit? Maybe we get our problems solved more quickly. How do you react to those comments?
First of all, I welcome the criticism, and I think that's an important criticism. I am too loud. My mom has been telling me that since I was born. I am not aggressive. I think people mistake assertive for aggressive. Like I tell people, and I tell in the protests that I lead and the students that I mentor, never, ever be violent. Never throw the first punch. You're allowed to protect yourself. But you shouldn't be aggressive. We gain nothing by screaming at the other side, by cursing, which I never do at the other side. But I will never cede my ground. I am assertive. If I stand somewhere and I have the right to stand there, I will stand there. And you'll have to push me and pull me over my dead body. But that doesn't make me aggressive. That makes me Israeli. That's different. But I tell people, and by the way, the media hungry, I am not media hungry at all. In fact, I very, very much miss my anonymity, my life before everything started personally for me. But I do recognize that a conversation like this between three people is important. But a conversation like this between three people with potentially thousands and thousands of people watching and tuning into the conversation is extremely important, and that's the tool that we have. But I always tell people, mine is not the only way to fight. If you believe that we would have solved the problem by toning it down, then you're getting the causality wrong. Because we have toned it down for decades, and that's why we have the problem, right? In fact, I tell people, you probably would not have known about the problem specifically at Columbia if I didn't make such a big stink out of it. You might have heard about some stuff at other places, but Columbia locked its gates on October 12, 2023, almost never to be reopened, so they can control what voices come out, what media is being heard. I never tone down for other people's requests, other than my wife, but I would say this, that doesn't mean that everyone needs to be like me. Fight with me in different ways, alongside me with different ways. We need people on the outside, we need people on the inside, we need people that are politically savvy, we need people that are, like me, are not afraid to call out any politician, left, right, or center. We need people that do the research and check the numbers, and we need people that write 140 characters on Twitter and make those numbers known for the entire world. This fight requires 15.8 million Jews.
So you said a moment ago, Shai, in responding to the question, the students at Columbia do not have enough role models in the Jewish world in the next age groups. How would you assess this very organization-heavy Jewish community? After all, we may or may not get it right, but we're certainly not short on organizations of all types. Some of them have probably come on campus to meet with students, whatever. Is the Jewish community going about this in the right way? Is there a role for them on campus, or by definition are they seen as outsiders and therefore, if anything, can only sort of screw up the works?
I think most organizations play an important role, and they play the role that they were supposed to play. Right? Most of the big major Jewish organizations, I don't want to name names because I think they do important things. Their role is to lobby, to fundraise for Israel and for Jews in the diaspora, to educate and to do media. And most of them do that really well. Their job has never been to mobilize. It's never been to get people to stand up and say, now we are fighting, now we are protesting. That has to come from the people. And
But is there a role for these organizations at Columbia University? Does Columbia University really care what organization X or Y says from the outside, or do they laugh it off?
I think Columbia University cares when it matters to their PR and to their money. And they put much less weight at what Shai Davidai says than what, for example, Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL says, or Brooke Goldstein from the Lawfare Project, or Elisa Licht from the Brandeis Center. We could be all saying, and we are all saying mostly the same thing, but those organizations have the same donors base that Columbia has, and they care. Those organizations have the same media links that Columbia has and cherishes, and they care. So I think those organizations are extremely important on campus, and we're also providing financial support for the students who are fighting, and giving them the resources. Right? Take, for example, an organization like Stand With Us. Right? Stand With Us is a educational organization for students in high school and in college. It gives them a lot of resources. What the students do with those resources, that's a different thing. That's where I come in and I tell, okay, now you have the knowledge, don't keep it in your head, use your mouth to make sure that everyone, Jewish or non-Jewish, has that knowledge too. But they play the role of giving them that education.
Okay, that's important to know. Charles, I know you have a question. I just want to slip in one more question, and then I'm going to hand the microphone, such as it is.
I'm sorry if my answers are too long.
No, not at all, not at all. So let's bring it back to you as a parent. You mentioned you have a 9-year-old.
Yeah, and a 3-year-old daughter, yeah. 9-year-old boy, a 3-year-old daughter.
Okay, you have 2 children, and fast forward, they're seniors in high school. And Abba, we want to apply to Columbia. We think we have the grades. We don't know if we have the holistic personality that you spoke about, but we think we have the grades. If it were today, what would you tell your kids?
If it were today, I would ask them, what is your goal for college? Is your goal to study and just focus on your studies? don't go to Columbia. Don't even get close to Columbia. And I would tell that, by the way, to non-Jewish students as well. Why would you go to a place where classes are canceled left and right because a fringe group that supports U.S. designated terrorist organization can't be reined in or won't be reined in by the administration? At the same time, if you are interested in learning what the world is really like in terms of the hate and the indifference that exists in the world, and are willing not to hide your Jewish and Israeli identity, but to stand up and fight, then by all means, go. And remember that you're not just representing yourself, my son or my daughter, but you're also representing the Jewish people. As an Israeli, you're representing Israel. And as a humanistic values that I give you, you're representing humanity. And you need to fight for that and not take that for granted. I know it's not the easy answer. A lot of people just want to know, okay, so what do I do with my kids? And I tell them, it really depends on what kind of kid do you have. If you have a fighter
I think
at
it's a
home,
very fair answer, actually. It's a very well thought out answer.
it's a question that I've been dealing with a lot, because I wish I could say, go to Columbia, go to any place. By the way, I should mention, my wife is an alum. She graduated from the Master's of Fine Arts program. Her grandfather got his PhD at Jewish history in 1950s from Columbia, and then came back as the head of the chair of the Jewish department, the studies of the Jewish studies at Columbia in the 70s. So I don't hate Columbia. I love Columbia. I believe in Columbia. I think Columbia as an idea is a great idea. It's just not being put so into practice, and that's why I'm fighting the administration. In the same way that I can completely criticize the American government, the Israeli government, any other government, and yet still believe in the American idea or the Israel idea. And
so we're going to have you back in a few years when your kids are starting to think about college and you're going on those tours.
I should tell you, the conversation between my wife and I'm putting this on record, and I may be, egg on my face in many years.
You might be sleeping on the couch tonight. Be careful.
Yeah, but I told her I would want my kids to do high school in Israel.
That's what I was going to ask. That was my question. If your kids are at the high school age and they say, Abba, do I stay in the United States to go to university, or do I go to Israel?
My plan, my hope, and I don't know, because whenever with Israel, everything has to do with hope.
And don't plan too far ahead as a parent, I've learned.
But my hope is that we will be in Israel by the time they're in high school. I may be wrong. But either way, even if we're not, the plan is that my son and my daughter would do a gap year or two in Israel before college. Because the thing that I've noticed is that the Jewish students who've done a gap year, and it doesn't matter if it's a religious gap year in a yeshiva, if they're picking strawberries at a kibbutz, if they are working in Sderot, whatever it is, the kids that spent a year, 2 years in Israel, they come back to campus stronger, more resolute, because when students spew lies at them, it doesn't shake them at nothing, because they've seen it. You can't tell someone Israel is quote unquote an apartheid state when they just last week were in a bus next to an Arab Muslim, an Arab Christian, an Ethiopian Jew. They were at a restaurant. They saw them on TV. It doesn't rattle them.
That's great advice, by the way, to JBS viewers who are asking themselves, what do I do as a parent or grandparent? And Shai Davidai just gave you a great idea, whether you're Israeli or not. Don't just send them for a week on Project Birthright, which is great. How about a year or 2 years between high school and college?
So my view is my advice to Jewish people is, bar mitzvah, tone down the parties here, use the money to take the family to Israel. That should be a rite of passage. Bar mitzvah is a rite of passage to the tribe, right? And being in Israel at least once is a rite of passage. Take them once bar mitzvah. Gap year, let them do it as adults by their own, or it's 18, 19. And then in college they can go to Birthright, where they can get the extra additional.
Or even do a semester abroad.
Or a semester abroad. Columbia has the dual degree program, which is what the pro-Hamas group is trying to stop from happening. There's many, many ways. I am trying to get more Israelis to connect with the Jewish diaspora, and the Jewish diaspora to connect with Israelis. Part of that is learning Hebrew. Part of that is listening Israeli Jews to Jewish American music and culture, and Jewish Americans to Israeli music and culture. We can't have a people with two centers.
Charles.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that you hope your children will go back to Israel eventually.
And me.
Okay, wonderful. That's my dream too. Recently we interviewed Professor Ruth Weiss, who wrote a book on Jews and power, and she was just saying in our interview that the Jews have nowhere left to run, that the anti-Semitism has now arrived in North America and it's serious, and that we're a sovereign people and we have to start acting like a sovereign people.
Right.
So given your experience at Columbia, I know you had difficult experiences at Columbia, but on the other hand, you came in as an Israeli student, you did your doctorate at Cornell, and you were at Princeton and in the New School and Columbia. You were at the top of the top in this country. So you've experienced the wonderful part of this country and the difficult parts. Where do you see the future, not just of your family, but maybe of our people?
The honest answer that I want to say is wherever we want to be. That should be the answer for Jews or for any people. Wherever we want to be, that should be our future. Look, Israel needs the diaspora, and the diaspora needs Israel. I think October 7 made that clear. October 7 made it clear to Israel that it needs the diaspora. We mustn't forget that in the first few weeks of the war, the Jewish diaspora in the US and Canada and Europe and Australia, all over the world, rallied around Israel, gave Israel the funds and the political strength that it needed to protect itself, defend itself. At the same time, October 8th, when the hatred came to attack us here in the diaspora, made it clear that we need Israel. And I was meeting with someone in the foreign ministry of Israel's foreign ministry, and as a rule, I don't work with politicians, I don't work with governments, but I will meet with anyone. And they said the Jewish diaspora is extremely important to Israel, Israel's government, and the American Jewish diaspora is extremely important within that entire diaspora. We need a strong Jewish diaspora, and strong Zionist Jewish diaspora, and we need a strong Jewish, proud Jewish presence in Israel. That's the only way for us to keep going. And we shouldn't be made to choose. Unless you want to make Irish people in the diaspora choose, if you want to make Albanians choose, if you want Myanmar, you want to make Burmese choose between being a diaspora and having an ethno-state, you want to make 22 Arab Muslim countries choose, that doesn't make sense. And like everyone else, we are just like everyone else. We should have the same rights.
When a relative of mine heard earlier today that you're coming on the show, they asked me, I think at the cost of our relationship, if I didn't ask you, to ask you a question. So
Yeah,
I'm going to pass along that question, if I may, in our remaining minutes. And I'm doing this from memory, ask Professor Davidai, how can it be that the most so-called progressive elements on a campus, in this case Columbia, end up supporting the most regressive forces on earth? Don't they see the irony of standing up for women's rights and LGBTQ rights and environmental rights on the one hand, and on the other hand associating themselves with people who either reject those rights, couldn't care less about those rights, trample on those rights? So, as our intermediary between them and our viewers, explain the mindset of the encampment at Columbia University.
I wish
I hope I
could
got that
explain.
question right.
So
you know who asked.
I should say that question has been bugging me, and various other questions have been troubling me for a while, and that's why I started writing a book. I'm writing a book. I'm about halfway through. As it will be a mass, like not an academic book, for everyone to read, that hopefully no questions will go unanswered. And to understand that mindset, we need to understand two things. And I'm sorry, every answer becomes too long. But one is the idea, this postmodernist idea that has taken over academic institutions in North America, originated in continental Europe, which is, it went from, this homogenous view in academia where, it was mostly like derogatory, the straight white Christian male, right? And then people said, this is not acceptable, which they were right, and said, other people have subjective experiences, we need more views. And I completely agree with that. But then they took it a step further and said, not only do we need more views, but every view is equally valid. That's where we got to this extreme moral relativism, which has overtaken humanities and many social sciences in academia in North America. Now, what does that mean? That if I come and say, I believe that female genitalia mutilation is immoral, bad, and should be removed from the world, and someone else comes and says, I'm an Islamist, you're being like Edward Said, you're being an Orientalist, you're seeing it from your view. From my view, it's actually important, respect. Both of our views are now at university equally valid. I believe that, the Holocaust was bad. Someone else says, actually, I don't agree with you. Both of our views are equally valid. That is a problem. So you take that, and you take the intentional infiltration of Hamas ideology into campuses, which started, and we have a date for this, 1993 in the Marriott Hotel at the airport outside of Philadelphia, where they say, we need to find a way to infiltrate American colleges, media, and research centers. All of them they did. That very same year, a few months later, Khatem Bazian starts Students for Justice in Palestine at Berkeley. A few years later, he starts American Muslims for Palestine and creates a national Students for Justice in Palestine. None of this is grassroots. He's taking these ideas of moral relativism, which already the soil was ready to accept these horrific ideologies, and now you have an intentional ideology infiltrating to the university, and now we know within 30 years you can get terrorist organizations from saying we're going to introduce our ideology to campuses to students saying we are Hamas.
Funded by the Brotherhood in Qatar.
And of course we have foreign funding, and more important than the foreign funding, by the way, it's the lack of transparency on the moral. Because if I was able to go to the encampments and tell them, look, Joseph Mossad is getting so-and-so money, Rashid Khalidi is getting so-and-so money, Catherine Frank is getting, which I don't know because there's no transparency, then I'd be able to counter their mindset. But, yeah.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to bring it to an end right there. Although I just add one other date, in a way, to your timeline, 2016, if I remember correctly. The Oxford English Dictionary has its new word of the year in the English language. And in 2016, the word was post-truth. So my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth, yours is yours. They're all on an equal plane, exactly as you said, Shai.
And by the way, I should tell you, and people, a lot of Jews have a problem with me with tattoos and everything. I do have tattoos. I got a tattoo after October 7th that says Emet, truth, truth. To remind myself that it's not mine or yours. That is the important thing. And by the way, if the truth was against us, I probably would be fighting us. Yeah. But it's not against us, it's with us.
And as you said earlier, it's also a reminder of what universities are supposed to be about.
To search for truth.
But I've lost the way. So Charles, if I may say, on behalf of both of us, Shai, thank you. Thank you for making the trip into the studio.
You so
much. And far more, thank you for standing up for us.
Continued strength and success.
We all will stand up because that's the only thing we can do. Exactly. Our option is getting up.
And remind our JBS viewers as we close, how do they find your podcast?
Here I am with Shai Davidai on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on Instagram, Twitter, everything.
Cool.
Please listen, JBS viewers. Again, on behalf of Dr. Charles Small, the visionary founder and CEO of ISGAP, and myself, David Harris, thanks for watching, and see you again next week.